Coming up next, it's last night's viewer call-in program with Ron Paul, the 1988 Libertarian Party candidate for president. He joined us to talk about the Libertarian Party, its membership, and its goals. He also offered his views on the U.S. handling of the situation in the Persian Gulf. In the 1988 presidential election, Mr. Paul finished third behind Republican Vice President George Bush and Massachusetts Democratic Governor Michael Dukakis. He received slightly more than 430,000 votes, or about 0.5% of the total votes cast.
Ron Paul, former presidential candidate from the Libertarian Party. Do you agree with President Bush's decision to send American troops into Saudi Arabia?
No, I disagree, and the Libertarian Party certainly disagrees with this. The traditional American foreign policy was non-intervention and neutrality. It kept us out of war, out of foreign adventurism for 150 years. And the 20th century
candidate from the Libertarian Party. We'll be taking a look at the Libertarian Party and discussing their views on the economy and foreign policy and a number of other topics. If you have a question or comment for our guest, now is the time to call. The lines are open. If you're calling from the Eastern or Central time zones, you can reach C-SPAN by calling 202-628-2525. If you're calling from the Western time zones, 202-783-2727. And if you're watching us from outside the U.S., the numbers are on the screen. Mr. Paul, first of all, when you talk about the Middle East, how do you put it in the context of the Libertarian Party? Under what circumstances does the Libertarian Party believe that the United States ought to send troops to fight a war?
Well, in some ways, the Libertarian Party is an old-fashioned party in that we still believe in the Constitution. And the Constitution is a pretty good libertarian document in many, many ways. And on foreign policy, it does not authorize a president to wage war. And blockades are waging war. And we don't think he has the authority nor the moral right to involve himself into something that's none of our business. It doesn't serve the national security interest. Matter of fact, it's very damaging to the national security by exposing us to a potential Holocaust, a horrible war over there. So we think it's very, very dangerous and detrimental to national security, unconstitutional and immoral, and very expensive too. So therefore, we would say just stay out of there because they've been fighting over there for hundreds of years and they're going to continue to fight, and we're not going to bring peace among all the Arab nations over there.
If you were president, how would you respond to Saddam Hussein's decision to invade Kuwait?
Probably just totally ignored it, and the price of oil probably would have been back down to $17. The price of oil is skyrocketing now because our troops are over there. And some people even argue that we're serving big oil's interest by going over there and protecting the coalition between Arabs and big oil. And I think it would be over and done with. I mean, you have to really look at history and decide whether it's even worth considering. The fact that Kuwait was carved out as a new nation by the British 70 years ago, I mean, where do we start? We're still arguing here in this country about how to satisfy those people in this country that we injured many, many years ago, in particular the Native Americans and Native Indians. So in this sense, it's only a short 70 years ago that they artificially carved this nation out, and they're still upset in Iraq about this, and they have to settle their disputes. These are major problems. How would we have felt if the Soviet Union sent troops over here when we thought it was in our best interest to do something in Grenada? I mean, we don't want people meddling over here, and we shouldn't be meddling over there.
How do you see the events in the Middle East as they relate to America's economic situation?
You know, it's interesting. Some have argued economically that the economic turndown was, caused by this escalation of warlike activity over there. But the truth is the economy was in a sharp turndown before this came about. And this is just escalating, speeding it up, making it much worse. The deficits are totally out of control. It's been argued over many years in this country that very frequently, when economic conditions get very bad in this country, the presidents have a tendency to try to distract us from our domestic problems. I mean, how much have you heard about the savings and loan crisis lately? I mean, most people are still concentrating right now on the Middle East. So this I think is something worth considering. Whether or not that actually occurred, we don't know. But it's going to make it much, much worse. I mean, not only do we think it's wrong, but we think it's going to be very detrimental to the domestic economy, and obviously the markets think so. The dollar generally responds in world crises by going up. That's when we had a dollar as good as gold, and it was a sound dollar. But today, the dollar is on its last legs. Our economy in this country is on its last legs, just as the Soviet economy in Eastern Europe has been, and it's collapsed. So I think an event like this can be a total disaster, not only in foreign policy, and lead to many, many deaths of young men for no real good reason, but it's also maybe the precipitating event of not only a mild recession, but I'm really concerned enough to think that it could precipitate a depression in this country.
Does the Libertarian Party still believe, as I guess has been argued in the past, that we should be on the gold standard? And what would that mean in the current economic situation?
Well, you wouldn't, under a gold standard, you wouldn't have any inflation, because you wouldn't allow a government monopoly, the Federal Reserve, to print money out of thin air. I mean, there's the problem. You have a Congress that votes themselves largesse, that is, give the people whatever they want, they keep themselves in office, they build these political power bases, then they really don't have to act responsible about collecting any money to pay the bills. They just go and print it, send the Treasury bills to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve creates the credit. That's inflation. The money supply goes up, the value of the dollar goes down, and prices go up, and then it distorts the economy. So yes, we want a sound, honest monetary standard. It doesn't mean that we demand that the government institute a gold standard, but we demand honesty in money, that money be something sound and honest, something that no one can counterfeit. Not only individuals in a libertarian society, individuals can't counterfeit, but neither can government counterfeit. Today, individuals correctly aren't allowed to counterfeit. But we have legalized counterfeit by the Federal Reserve, condoned by the Congress. Very, very dangerous economic monetary system.
You served 4 terms in Congress. When did you come and when did you leave?
I was first elected on our 200th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence in 1776, and I served 4 terms and left in 1984. And during that time, mainly served on the Banking Committee. Very interested in banking and monetary affairs.
And prior to that, were you a practicing physician?
Yes, practiced obstetrics and gynecology in the town of Lake Jackson near Houston, and continue to do that.
Let's go to our first phone call. Again, in case you've just tuned in, we're visiting with former Congressman Ron Paul, who is also the Libertarian Party's candidate for president in 1988.
1980, right?
Let's go back to the phones. Charlotte, North Carolina, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ed. I have a few comments first to Mr. Paul, and then one observation that I'd like him to speak on. First of all, I have a sister that is in Kuwait, and she has 2 children over there. And he said that Kuwait has only been carved out for about 7 years.
70.
70 years, okay. If you'll go back through history, though, the family that is in rule in Kuwait has ruled there for several centuries. And in fact, that area, even before it was divided by the British, that area that is now known as Kuwait was in fact separated to some extent as a province and was ruled by that family. When you take into consideration what Saddam Hussein has done in an aggressive, brutal invasion of Kuwait, unprovoked by Kuwait, then you're talking about a man who has basically lost all morals and all reasoning for international law.
Is that sort of like invading Panama, Grenada, and bombing Libya?
No, there's a lot of difference there.
Oh, there is.
Panama, first of all, Libya, first of all, was the home for terrorist-based attacks and things like that. Panama.
Oh, yeah, but that was incorrect. That was never proven. That Syria might have done those things that they were blamed for. So that is not the way a free society operates, nor is it permitted under our Constitution.
Well, you've got to look at the big picture, and
I am.
I mean, it's kind of. I hate to belittle it to a game, but you got to look on it as sort of like a game of chess. You plan your moves, many moves ahead, and for us to say, and that's what I would basically like for you to speak on. You said that we should just stay home and keep our nose out of it. That it's really none of our business. But when does it become our business? When this man has obtained nuclear weapons, when this man has gone further than Kuwait, which there is probability that he may or may not have, but just from his actions.
Okay. Well, I think we become concerned when he threatens our national security. I believe the American people and your relatives now are much more threatened and much more in danger because we're over there than they would be if we had not gone over there. They would not be hostages. They only became hostages after we declared war and started keeping food and medicine away from the children of Iraq. So I would say that for us to develop a foreign policy designed to protect kingdoms, I mean, what kind of civil liberties do they have in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia? A few years ago, Saudi Arabia organized a boycott against the United States. Just a few months ago, we gave money and support and subsidies and helicopters and technology to this horrible Hitler of Iraq. So it's this foolishness of on again, off again, support one time and change our minds. So it's just amazing to me how the American people can get riled up so quickly. And yet if they would only look at history, heck, just a short time ago, here we were supporting this guy. And why is it that we are going to sacrifice American lives to restore a kingdom? A kingdom and a king has no respect for freedom of religion or freedom of press. There's no civil liberties there, and they treat women like they're in the Dark Ages.
There's a story that appears on the front page of today's Washington Post for those of you who may have access to it, and I know there are similar stories running on the pages of other dailies around the country. This one is entitled Imperialist Legacy, Lines in the Sand, which reviews the history of how the borders were drawn of Kuwait and Iraq and the rest of the countries in the Middle East. Some of you viewers may find that interesting. Let's go back to the phones. Haddon Heights, New Jersey. Thanks for standing by. Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Paul, it just so happened this afternoon I was reading a periodical called Conservative Review and an article by Llewellyn Rockwell called Realignment on the Right. Mm-hmm. I'm not greatly familiar. I have some interest in the Libertarian Party. And in the article, he talks about a split among the libertarians. There being leftist libertarians or left libertarians who are hostile to religion, family, community, tradition, as opposed to some of the values that the people out at the Rockford Institute have. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Is this so? Or have you read the article, by the way?
I don't know whether I've read that particular article, but I'm certainly aware of that debate going on in the Libertarian Party. It does exist. I think a small party that's philosophically oriented, and those individuals who join a party like that are very, very philosophic and determined, and therefore you will have serious debates of different factions. Lew Rockwell is concerned about a very serious problem in that sometimes it is perceived that libertarians who permit free choices literally or would then therefore endorse all those choices. For instance, our position in the party and my position is that we think there's no advantage to having these drug laws. We think there's a lot of disadvantages. So therefore, we take the position that we're for legalization of drugs and we don't like to interfere in the personal, private sexual habits of adults. So by saying that, does that mean that I endorse certain sexual practices such as prostitution? Do I endorse the use of drugs? No, on a personal level I don't. But you can see those individuals that may be persecuted because they endorse certain activity that we don't want to make illegal would then be wanting to associate with the Libertarian Party. And Mr. Rockwell's point is that we as libertarians have to make our program attractive to the average person in the street because, for instance, libertarians are very tolerant of all religions and they're even tolerant of atheists. But that doesn't mean that we should be a party of atheists. So therefore, we should have an appeal to everyone, and those people especially who have religious beliefs should feel comfortable and should feel protected in the Libertarian Party.
Camarillo, California. Thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Hello. I'm a retired physician, and as Walter Williams calls himself, a kind of wishy-washy libertarian. I get hung up, however, on the beginnings of World War II and whether we should have just let Hitler conquer Great Britain.
Well, I don't think you ever had to make that choice. I think the choice was The only choice we had to make in Europe was, should we join an authoritarian thug like Hitler, or should we join an authoritarian thug like Stalin? That was the whole choice. So we made the choice, because it was much more popular at the time, to join the authoritarian thug Stalin and give him Eastern Europe and prolong the agony for another 50 years before it was inevitable that we would see the failure of socialism and communism and see what happened last year. So I don't think that's the choice at all. We as libertarians say that the real choice is not joining and fighting with a thug, but joining and by becoming neutral, saying that unless we're threatened, we don't get involved. And the popular opinion in the late 1930s and even in 1940, 70–80% of the American people were opposed to going to war. Roosevelt, how did he get reelected in 40? By saying, I'm going to keep your boys at home. And then immediately something had to happen in order to congeal the American people, and obviously that was Pearl Harbor. Now, this does not mean that we should be unconcerned. This does not mean that we can't condemn Hussein and condemn Hitler and condemn Stalin, but it means that as a libertarian and by close observance of the Constitution, we allow people to handle this problem differently. That means that you as an individual in World War II could have gone and helped, or you could have sent your money. And right now, if you would like to send your sons or send your money to Saudi Arabia to help out, fine. But we just don't believe that the armed might and the authoritarianism of our own government should be used to support and sponsor authoritarianism and dictatorship around the world.
Dayton, Ohio. Go ahead, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Maddox. Good evening, Dr. Paul.
Good evening.
I met you a few years ago in September 1988 in Cleveland. I was the one that came all the way from Dayton to see you.
Oh, I remember.
All right. Sir, would you be of the mind that what has been occurring recently, such as the economy slipping, the recent aggression of our self-anointed, self-appointed autocrat, and a number of other things, the cry for a resumption of conscription and the like, might not be precipitating a police state? I mean, a thoroughgoing, hardcore, bread and butter, apple pie and mom, American-style police state. And I would like to make the comment that at the close of his brilliant essay, let's see, The Rise of Empire, the late Garrett made the comment, no doubt the people know they can have their republic back if they wanted enough to fight for it and to pay the price. The only point is that no leader has yet appeared with the courage to make them choose. I believe that you are that titan who will make them choose.
Well, thank you. I think we're getting dangerously close to a police state. During wartime, especially if you have a monster out there to conquer, the American people come together, and they're by nature, they want to be together, they want to be American, but what they don't understand is being patriotic and being American and being pro-constitutional might mean that you don't have to go and become a police state. But under those wartime conditions, people are much more likely to sacrifice their freedoms. And there's only one other time that comes close to war where people sacrifice their freedoms, and that's times of economic turmoil. And we're approaching that too. We already have an IRS, an FBI, a CIA, and an umpteen number of agencies that police us up and down. The banking regulations now provide no financial privacy anymore. I mean, they talk about the right to privacy. Well, that's what all freedom is all about, is privacy. And yet there is no privacy now in banking. And that's because the government needs our money, and they want to know what we're doing with our money. So we're on the verge of it. The underpinnings have already been destroyed. The American people are set up. I mean, they want to go to war at the drop of a pin, and they're willing to sacrifice their freedoms because they think they might be a little more secure. My argument is that they're going to be a lot less secure, internationally speaking as well as economically speaking, if they're not careful and they don't put their foot down and say, no, we've had enough, we don't want more big government.
Waterloo, Iowa. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Thank you, Ed. Good evening, Dr. Paul.
Good evening.
I have great respect for you. I've often wished you would have pulled an upset in the '88 election. My comment and question deals with the hemp issue. With Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait and threatening Saudi Arabia, what he's mostly after is the oil in that area. And from hemp, we can make virtually all the fuel that we need, and we can grow it every year. and it's also makes better paper, and it's more easily recyclable, and just in general, it's the most biomass productive plant on the planet. And I'm wondering if there's anything we can do to get the government to quit this insane policy of keeping this plant illegal.
What else can we do? Tell the audience what else we can do with hemp.
Well, there's all kinds of things.
Well, the whole thing is hemp is the same as marijuana, I guess, and therefore it's illegal. And I think it is. It's grass, it's a weed, and the government is obsessed with making it illegal. It makes people go out and shoot and kill each other in order to get some of this. So you point out some of the other economic benefits, and I think making something illegal for no good reason whatsoever, certain things should be illegal. That is the use of force and participating in fraud. But to make things illegal for various reasons of making the economy or people better leads to nothing but more trouble.
Mr. Paul, you mentioned the IRS a moment ago, and I wanted to get a sense of your view about tax policy in broad brush strokes. Tell us what the Libertarian Party would do about taxes.
Well, we certainly wouldn't have an income tax. There's no need in a free society to have an income tax. The assumption by Libertarian and by our Constitution is that if you work, the fruits of your labor are yours. I mean, that's a basic assumption. The very little that you must give or participate in should be a minuscule amount of your income to protect your liberties, to run the court system, and to provide for a national defense. Up until 1913, we didn't have an income tax, and we didn't fight foreign wars, and we didn't inflate the economy, and we didn't have a welfare state, and we didn't have people living in the streets, and we didn't have people without medical care, we didn't have people corrupting the housing programs, so it was a lot different. So we don't want that size government. We want to do away with the income tax, and we want a sound currency, because the other way governments can tax a people is through just printing press money, and that of course dilutes the value of the money and takes away from real value. So to eliminate all taxes, you have to eliminate the Internal Revenue Service, and you also have to have a sound currency.
Lancaster, Pennsylvania, go ahead, you're next.
Yes, Dr. Paul.
Yes.
Lately, for the last 2 years, I was terminated from a company under false pretenses. And they said about going to your congressman and all the agencies, your unemployment compensation, such, and all these different agencies. I've literally contacted every one of those, and I've been fighting this battle for almost 2 years to try to get some kind of justice with this kind of system. And, well, you know what it's like. It's called the legal runaround, and I get absolutely nowhere. My boyfriend, on the other hand, was a Vietnam War veteran. He has still yet to see any of his benefits. And now they want to send these people from Kuwait. They're not going to get any of their benefits either. So all they're doing is filling the VA hospitals. It's really not going to amount to anything.
Well, I think you've made the point of the Libertarian that you can't trust government and you can't trust bureaucracies. They say they're going to do good things for you, and it doesn't work. Now, if somebody's been mistreated in a libertarian society with their employer and employee, and they've done it by misstatements or claims of fraud, and they're lying about things, that should all be handled locally where you can handle it and deal with it. But the fact that our government claims they're going to protect you and take care of you and settle all these disputes and provide you for all the good things of life, it's just nothing more than a political ploy for somebody to get reelected. And I think it's a good reason for you to consider our viewpoint that some of these agencies just shouldn't exist because they don't do what they are supposed to do.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, go ahead. Let me try again. Go ahead, Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, hi. I've got two questions. What do you think about requiring books from the American Revolution in all high schools, like the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin or the works of Thomas Paine, like The Rights of Man, so the people will know what it means to be an American? And number two, could you explain the treasonous Marxist alcoholic dictators that pull the strings in our country, like the Rockefeller-controlled Trilateral Commission and Council of Foreign Relations?
Okay, first I wouldn't require people to read certain books. I mean, it would be nice if I, as a national leader, dictator in this country, would say, I will tell the students of this country what to read. We should work much more diligently for competition education, private education, where those who are unhappy with their schools can pick up and go down the street and find another school. And if they don't have the kind of books that you want, then find one that does. That would solve that problem. Now, you refer to who really pulls the strings, and for years now, it's been claimed by many, and there's pretty good evidence that those who are involved in the Trilateral Commission and the Council of Foreign Relations usually ends up in positions of power. And I believe this is true. This is, if you look at the Federal Reserve, if you look at key positions at the World Bank or the IMF, they all come from these groups. If you have national television on, and you might see a big debate about the Far East crisis, and you have Brzezinski and Kissinger talking about how to do it. One says, don't invade today, invade tomorrow, and the other says don't invade immediately. And that's the only difference you find among the Rockefeller trilateralists. But I think this is an important point here, because I think money is involved here, power is involved, and oil is involved. The American people are loving this invasion, but they have to realize that we're fighting for the oil companies who are partners with the Arabs, who are dictators, who would boycott us in a minute if they get the chance. So it's power and oil, and those individuals who help formulate policy in these two groups certainly have a lot to say about our government.
In case you've just joined us, we're visiting with Ron Paul, who was the Libertarian candidate for president in 1988, also a former member of Congress from Texas. You were initially in the Republican Party?
Yes, and when I was in Congress, I was Republican.
When did you become a Libertarian?
Well, I probably was always a Libertarian. and there's a lot of Libertarians in the country who may still belong to another party. Of course, we're trying to get them over to our party, but there are a lot of frustrating things that keep that from happening. But I joined the party in 1987, the Libertarian Party. But the acceptance of the belief that government should be limited to protecting our liberty and accepting the notion that no individual has the right to initiate force. See, I'm very attracted to this nonviolent, non-initiation of force principle that we all accept. And I've accepted that principle in a long time. So it's defense that you're permitted to do. We're not pacifists in the sense that we wouldn't defend ourselves, either as individuals or as a country. We should defend ourselves. But I guess as long as I can remember, I endorse those views.
Tucson, Arizona, you're next with your question or comment.
Yes, good afternoon. I want to thank you and C-SPAN for the fine work you've been doing. I have 4 major points that I would like to propose for a comment that I believe would get rid of at least 80% of the problems we have in this country. One is to follow the letter and spirit of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. 2 would be to get rid of victimless crime laws, which would save money on prosecution and incarceration and would generate taxes and new industries. Energy policy, in terms of like a $15 per barrel approximately oil tax, where the imported oil, the tax revenue could go towards reducing the national debt, and the domestic oil tax could go towards renewable and alternative sources of energy, thereby generating many new jobs, helping the environment, and ensuring political and economic security in terms of energy. And the last point, I'm working towards a goal called DMZ 2000, which stands for Demilitarized Zone 2000, which the goal is for global verifiable demilitarization by the year 2000, to start off the new millennium in that way.
All right, caller, let me stop you there. You've got a number of points. Let's let our guest respond to some of them. Thank you.
Certainly the first 2 that I can endorse wholeheartedly. The Constitution is a good guideline, and if it isn't libertarian enough for us, we should change it according to the rules. Victimless crimes, I think that telling people how to act on a personal level as long as they don't hurt other people is a good idea, and it would certainly eliminate about 50 or 60% of those who are in prison today, because I think the laws against victimless crimes is what produces that. I'm not for taxes, though. I mean, if we're going to have a libertarian society, we want to reduce taxes. We sure don't want to raise taxes on the American people. The market will take care of it. I want cheap oil. I want the best price, and that's why I want a free market. And the other thing, a demilitarized zone, you'd get that, but you don't need to have any international agreements. You don't have to do any contracts. You just have to have an open, free, libertarian society. Let all our enemies know exactly what we have. Let them know where our weapons are. Let them know how we can defend this country. But more importantly, let them know that the American people understand and believe in liberty, and they're not going to put up with anybody taking away. Under those circumstances, our greatest threat is probably here in Washington, D.C., rather than from the Soviet Union or some Saddam Hussein. I mean, that's not really our threat. Our threat is here at home. So we don't need to have verifiable treaties. We would have a lot less weapons. And the Soviet Union, they couldn't even feed themselves, so why do we have to worry about where their weapons are? They're out trying to get a $12 billion bailout from the West from the IMF. So what we need is vigilance, and we need to cut off all that, but we don't need any more taxes.
Greenville, South Carolina, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Paul, I'd like to know first if you're running for office again in the next election. And if so, I'd like you to know that you've got my vote. And a while ago, you made a statement saying about how people going out and killing or committing crimes, let's say, to get a hold of hemp. I disagree with that. I think there are more people going out committing crimes for the harder substances.
Probably so.
And I think we'd do a lot better if we'd treat alcohol and hemp in the same light.
Well, I'm for taking care of all drugs the same way. Alcohol and cigarettes are big killers, so we should treat all the other drugs the same way. I mean, they're the hard drugs, and yet they're legal. Governments sell alcohol frequently, and they certainly subsidize tobacco. So I would say we should treat them all the same. That is, turn them over to the free market, let people make their own decisions about whether they want to smoke and drink, and also whether they want to use hard drugs. There's not that many people who do use hard drugs. For the amount of crime we have in this country, it really comes from the fact that these laws are not very wise. As far as running for office, I have no immediate plans for running for office. Possibly someday that may occur, but I'm still resting from last time.
Dr. Paul, do you and the Libertarian Party have a position on the nomination of Judge Souter for the Supreme Court?
No, I don't think the party has made a statement on that, and I personally would feel like a lot of other people probably wouldn't know enough about him to say, would he be a good judge, would he have libertarian leanings or not. I haven't heard any real negatives to say that he is anti-libertarian, but I really haven't studied it enough. But I would think it's very unlikely that we would take a position on that.
What would you look for in a Supreme Court justice?
Of course, somebody that would understand what freedom is all about, what rights mean, that individuals have rights but groups don't have rights, and that understands the Constitution and would rule on law and say, look, this is either constitutional or it isn't, and not to rewrite law in their court rulings. And then if certain laws were not constitutional and we need to change it, let the legislature and the people change them.
Ron Paul is our guest, in case you've just joined us. He is the former member of Congress who was also the Libertarian candidate for president in 1988. We still have time to get your call in if you have a question. Let's go to Washington, D.C. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Maddox. And hi, Dr. Paul.
Hi.
I wanted to know about, you're turning into a libertarian as we speak. I guess I was one and just didn't know what to call it.
Probably natural.
I'd like to know about your views on the perpetuation of the two-party system in this country, and how we can get out of it and make it a real multi-party system where everybody has a chance at being elected, not just Democrats or Republicans.
I'll tell you what, we're dangerously close to not having a chance to change that, and we really don't have a two-party system. If you come around to understanding and accepting the basic premise of the libertarian position, you will accept the idea that really the two parties are the same. You can work for and encourage a man like Ronald Reagan to run for office because he wants less government, he wants to spend less money, he wants less taxes, he wants to balance the budget. And I was one of those individuals. In the 70s, I encouraged and did what I could to encourage Ronald Reagan. But what happened? He spent like a liberal Democrat did. So policies don't change. I mean, whether you would have had a lot of people said, well, I wanted to vote for you, Ron, last time, but I had to vote against Dukakis. It's truth is, actually, there would have been no difference. Policies are the same. Both administrations on the back, in behind the scenes, it's either a Kissinger or a Brzezinski, and it's either for some welfare of this type, or welfare for the poor, or welfare for the rich, or welfare for the foreigners. Very rarely do you have this opportunity. The laws are biased against us. It's so hard to get on the ballots. We spent, you know, in 1988, I raised over $1 million. Half my money had to go to just trying to get on the ballots. But that's design. Who writes all the laws? Who makes it difficult? The Republicans and the Democrats. And C-SPAN was great for the Libertarians. They at least allowed us to come on and explain our views, and it was very, very generous. But do you think the three majors were concerned? I mean, do you think there's an opposition among the three major networks today presenting a more libertarian, pro-American viewpoint in the Middle East? No, we don't hear that. So we're dangerously close to having a very, very closed society, a one-party system, and the American people really haven't had a choice. The only choice the American people have right now is not to vote when they get sick of it all. And if you take our vote, the Libertarian vote, and those who are sick of it all, we're the large majority. Only about 48% of the people voted last time.
Dr. Paul, how can people contact the Libertarian Party if they're interested?
Well, the best thing to do is, you know, to call our 800 number. We have an 800 number. It's very easy to call. It's 682-1776, and we would be very glad to send information about the Libertarian Party or any particular issue that we haven't been able to cover. It's 682-1776, an 800 number.
Oceanside, California, go ahead.
Yes, I was under this understanding that taxes under the Constitution were supposed to be collected in gold from states, and the income tax was never really ratified. Every year at the end of session, they vote again Emergency Act to keep it in action. And I've heard lots of different views on this C-SPAN, and I was just wondering if there's any kind of anarchist representation involved here. I'll just let you talk on this.
An anarchist representation with the Libertarians? I wonder if that's what he meant.
Caller, are you gone?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Do you mean anarchists with the Libertarians?
No, not necessarily. I know some of the views are probably some of the, similar, but, as far as like peaceful anarchists go, but... Yeah.
Well, on the taxes, the Constitution, as I understand it, meant that the states would be, they would be required to pay a certain proportion to the government, the federal government, to run it. That changed in 1913, and there is this debate and even books written on the fact that technically it wasn't properly ratified. I think it's an academic point and not a legal point, because can you imagine a court today ruling tomorrow, that the income tax is illegal? Even if it is illegal, well, we all know it's immoral and it's a bad idea. But it's the establishment, the politicians especially, the people, they're not going to do it that way. So I think it's an academic discussion on whether or not they really ratified the Constitution, the 13th, the income tax as properly, as it should have been done properly.
St. Peter, Minnesota, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. I have a question for you, Mr. Paul, with regard to how you feel about the armed services. You say that we should not be in the Middle East. Since we are, I'd like to know if you do support the men and women who are serving there on our behalf. And also, I would like to know, you say that we should not have gone over to Iraq and that we should have completely ignored the situation. What about the Americans who are there, Americans that are being held hostage? These are our neighbors and friends. And how do you feel about the armed services?
Okay.
How would you say the Libertarian Party feels as far as protecting our nation?
Well, I think we should protect our nation, but we as Libertarians believe that we expose our nation much more so by going over there, that men are going to be killed. We've had 16 men or so killed already by accidents, and they wouldn't have to die. Marines died in the Beirut barracks. So I would say that we have the greatest concern for the soldier. I served 5 years in the military, and I know something about being in the military. But I think exposing them to needless and useless situations is the least concern about the American people. I mean, here we have a president asking these kids to go over there. They're talking about the draft. They call up the reserve. They disrupt thousands of lives, and he has to prove he's unconcerned and keeps playing his golf and going fishing. I mean, that should be enough to annoy every American person.
Rochester, New York. Thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm been a long-standing supporter of the Libertarian Party. I'm really glad they're around. They give me a lot of spiritual uplifting. What I'd like to say, although I'm in favor of the party's position of military isolationism, I wonder if you'd give any credibility to the point that if Hussein acquired Kuwait and then acquired Saudi Arabia, that this would be great control over what is economically viable, the oil specifically, and that would be a threat to our society.
I don't see it as a threat. The Arab nations got together in the 1970s and they were unified. They're all a bunch of dictators over there, and they got together and they rigged the price of oil, and they got away with it mainly because we had regulation of prices here. The best attack against Arabs doing anything to us in the oil price is deregulation, and we already have that. Now, you say, what would have happened if they went into Saudi Arabia? Let's say that he did and he took Saudi Arabia. Well, you know who might just take care of him then? Maybe Israel will. I mean, Israel has something at stake here, and Israel might have to defend themselves and take care of it, but it's not our business to defend these sheiks and these kings and these dictators and these violators of civil liberties and these guys that rig oil prices, these people who are in partnerships with our big oil companies. The American people are outraged the fact that they're going and paying 25 and 30 cents per gallon. At the same sense, they're supporting the whole notion that they're going to send their kids and their money to support the same people they think they should, that they're angry at.
Greenwood Village, Colorado, you're the last caller. Go ahead.
This question I've got for Dr. Paul, in fact, first of all, I'd like to tell you that I agree with most of the things you say, but a question on Middle East I have. If you are primarily against sending troops out there because Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait, where would you draw the line to stop the man? Would you draw the line after he attacks, say, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates? Where would
I would draw the line when he starts to attack United States, because I have no authority. If I were still in Congress, I would listen to the Constitution and pay attention to it, and I would say, I, as a congressman who swore to uphold the Constitution, I have no authority to take young people and American people's taxpayers and go and stop some madman halfway around the world, because that's making the thing much worse. So no, I would not draw the line there. I would draw it back here for our national security. I don't want to endorse a system and a program and a policy that literally increases a threat to our national security. Now we're truly threatened, and that's mainly the reason the oil price has skyrocketed.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
We've been visiting with Ron Paul, who was the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party in 1988. Thank you for your phone calls, and stay tuned for our next discussion.
Join C-SPAN.
That concludes this discussion with Ron Paul, 1988 Libertarian Party candidate for president. Here is a reminder now that the United States House of Representatives will reconvene here in Washington this Wednesday following the traditional summer recess. And that means our long-standing commitment to bring you live gavel-to-gavel coverage of House proceedings will also continue. So join us Wednesday for live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the United States House of Representatives, beginning at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. for our West Coast viewers. And coming up next, it's a look at the federalism, rule of law, separation of powers in the U.S. and the Soviet Union.